broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a great day. I'm just on here to do a quick sound and visual check. So if you can see the PowerPoint slides on the screen and hear me talking, if you could kindly click the raise hand icon just to let me know. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good morning and welcome to CIPH's webinar presentation, Zero Emission Building Retrofit Strategy. I'm Jason McKenzie, Program Chair, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you from across Canada participating today. It looks like we have 32 sites, 65 sites registered for this complimentary webinar session. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent out once the final version is available. For questions, please type them into the questions or chat box on the right-hand side of your webinar control panel. Sarah will be monitoring the chat box for us today and leading the questions at the end of each section. We're fortunate to have two presenters with us for today's webinar. Michael Lang from City of Vancouver. Micah is a senior green building planner with the Urban Design and Sustainability Department. He works on policy and programs for reducing carbon pollution from existing buildings and is managing the development of zero emissions building retrofit strategy. Christine Gustafson is a principal consultant with Harbor Green Consulting. She has 16 years of experience as an energy management consultant and utility professional. Ms. Gustafson holds a Master's of Business Administration in Executive Management and a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering. Please join me in welcoming Micah and Christine. Micah, over to you to start us off.
Great. Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be with you this morning and this afternoon for those of you further east. Thanks for the introduction, Jason, and thanks for your assistance in setting up this session. Really timely opportunity for us to speak with you today as we're getting ready to put the finishing touches on a pretty ambitious piece of policy work. It's an overarching strategy that's going to shape how the city moves forward with reducing carbon emissions from its existing buildings over the next decade and beyond. And we're going to be bringing this to council as a part of a broader climate emergency action plan this November. And so this is an opportunity for us to share the draft strategy with some key stakeholders, and certainly members of CIPH are among those. And as a part of this overall initiative that we've been working on, we've been trying to reach out to different groups. We engaged Harbor Green Consulting. When was it? Beginning last year, and to get their help in reaching out to a number of those different industry stakeholder groups. And so Christine will be here to share some of the results from that study that was focused on skilled trades and the capacity that currently exists and what it might mean as we transition towards renewable energy systems for more of the heating and hot water needs of our existing buildings, what that might mean for local industry. Great. So we've taken care of the welcome and introductions. I'm going to run through a bit of background so you have more context on Vancouver's climate emergency response and where we're headed. The meat of this session is the zero emission building retrofit strategy. I'll walk you through that. We'll have a chance to answer questions. I'm going to fly through a lot of information. And as Jason mentioned, we will be sharing the slides afterwards so that you can have a little bit more time to digest it and to respond if you need. Then we'll hand it over to Christine, who's going to walk you through that trades transition workforce study. I have another chance for some Q&A. And then finally, I'll share a few case studies that illustrate the types of retrofits that we think will be much more common going forward in the city, that they're the types of project to help us deliver on our carbon pollution reduction commitments. And then a final session of questions. I've got some specific questions for the attendees today, thinking forward to more detailed planning and the development of the actual regulations, the types of information, the types of analysis that you feel would be important to do in order to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. So with that, I'll dive in. It's not a surprise to most folks that climate change is of concern to the majority of residents of Vancouver. It ranks pretty high up there in terms of what people are concerned about. It's also a concern of our current council. It's, I'd say, a top 4 concern of theirs. And this has all been sort of thrown into flux in our current situation. We've got a real challenge in balancing our city budget. We have stresses to deliver services that are being exacerbated by the COVID situation. We have a lot of stresses being felt by building owners right now, whether it's homeowners, commercial building owners. There's new stresses that are being dealt with, and a lot of uncertainty around the future. And so this is a context that we're having to navigate as we move forward with the strategy. And then finally, equity has really come to the forefront this year as well. The city's been working on the development of a citywide equity strategy for the past year and a half, which is going to be coming forward before the end of this year. That's been feeding into the strategies and the approach that we're taking for the zero emission building retrofit strategy, as well as the overall climate emergency response. So cities around the world have been taking a leadership role when it comes to carbon pollution reduction. There's been more than 1,200 cities globally that have declared a climate emergency and have been articulating plans for how they're going to take action. In the spring of 2019, City of Vancouver declared the emergency 6 months prior, and then in council last spring, there were 6 big moves that were identified as being really critical to addressing the climate emergency locally. What we're going to focus on today is number 4, space and hot water heating. And the target that was set a year ago was that by 2025, all new and replacement heat and hot water systems will be zero emission. That's changed a bit since then, and I'll get into that in a moment. The other climate emergency areas are identified on the screen. Number 1 and number 6 have been integrated into the broader Vancouver plan process and are not going as a part of the short-term climate emergency response, because they're more integral to broader city planning initiatives. So a bit of context of where we've been. The city's been able to reduce carbon pollution 12% in the previous decade. The target that's been set by council now is a 50% reduction by 2030 if we're going to be in line with the scientific consensus around what the need to reduce emissions is. That's more than a 5-fold increase in the rate of reductions that we've been able to achieve in the past. So this is a big acceleration of our efforts, and more than an acceleration, it signals the need to shift our approach to reducing carbon pollution in existing buildings. This is en route to a carbon neutral city before the year 2050. And what the science actually tells us is that we need negative emissions beyond that. If we're going to, globally, we need negative emissions if we're going to stabilize the climate. In Vancouver, buildings are the largest source of carbon pollution. Almost 60% of emissions come from buildings, with transportation being the second largest contributor. And moving now into the zero emission building retrofit strategy, the scope is all existing buildings in the city of Vancouver. 4 years ago, a really important piece of policy was put in place impacting the new buildings. This was the zero emission new building plan. This created a framework by which the city, in a stepwise approach, would reduce the maximum allowable carbon pollution from new buildings going forward, and then to give clarity to industry how that would step down over time. This, as many of you probably aware, was developed kind of in parallel with the BC Energy Step Code. There's a very similar framework to that. So here we are in 2020, Zero Emission Building Retrofit Strategy, and as I mentioned, this is a chapter within the Climate Emergency Action Plan, which is going to go to our City Council in early November of this year. In the process of developing the strategy, we've shifted away from the target of all new and replacement must be zero emission by 2025 and put in place that 50% reduction target. So this means that a significant shift in what we're doing, but it is less prescriptive, and I think that'll be an important component of this strategy going forward, and will have will allow much needed flexibility in how we're able to achieve those reductions. So let's get into a little bit more detail on the strategy itself. As mentioned, we're aiming for a 50% reduction by 2030. So what is it going to take to do this? All private buildings in the city are within scope, and really, because of the diversity of existing buildings, construction era, construction type, uses of buildings, different tenure types, we can't take a one-size-fits-all approach. We have to employ a number of different tools, support mechanisms if this is going to be successful. A little bit more about the timeline. Right now, we are in the build-up to that report that's going to go to City Council in November of 2020. A few important things that are happening at the provincial and federal level below the timeline on the screen right now. A number of stakeholders, more than 150 different organizations were involved in the development of the BC Building Electrification Roadmap. This is going to be released later this fall and speaks to a really important element of a zero emission building strategy, and that's how do we ensure that we're more successful in getting heat pumps and electrification of space and hot water equipment into buildings. I'll speak a little bit more to that roadmap as we go along through the presentation. Also, actually, at a national level, we have work that's ongoing to develop a national energy code for existing buildings, which then will be subsequently translated into provincial code. And looking out to the next decade, we have the commitment through the Pan-Canadian Framework for Climate Change by the federal government that in 2025, minimum equipment efficiency will essentially require heat pumps for all space and hot water heating. So by 2035, we're moving in that direction of very high efficiency mechanical equipment anyways. So what we're talking about in Vancouver is accelerating that timeline a bit, but hopefully adding flexibility in our requirements such that buildings are taking a variety of different approaches and meeting and achieving reductions, not just heat pumps, but employing a number of different tactics. The other important thing to note on the timeline is that once we get direction from council and council approves this strategy in November, we'll enter into the actual regulatory development phase, which will be more detailed consultation and analysis, which will take place from this fall through the first quarter of 2022. That's when we anticipate bringing actual regulatory language forward to be approved with a target effective date of 2025. A little bit more context in the city that shaped how we approached this challenge. Existing buildings, 1.4 million tons of emissions on an annual basis. And you can see the breakdown of emissions by the major building types in the table. Pretty even distribution between detached homes, multifamily buildings, or multi-unit residential buildings, the MERB acronym, commercial, industrial, and then a small percentage of other buildings. And because of the carbon pollution intensity of our grid, which is quite low in BC, 95% of our building emissions are from natural gas. And so our focus has to be decarbonizing thermal energy in buildings. And the primary mechanism by doing this is high efficiency mechanical equipment. That's going to be through using renewable energy and replacing existing lower efficiency equipment with high efficiency equipment. This is going to need to be supported by other efficiency improvements in buildings, including envelope improvements in some cases, including the use of renewable fuels like renewable natural gas in many cases. It's going to have to be a multifaceted approach. And so this is something that I'm sure folks on the webinar this morning appreciate. But if you are moving from gas mechanical equipment to a heat pump, it's not a like-for-like replacement. In most cases, you might need to upgrade other systems in the building. This adds cost to your project. There may not be sort of readily available information and capacity within building management or ownership, nor their contractors to manage this transition. And then you might have to jump through additional hoops on the regulatory or process side as well in order to make this change. And so there's a bunch of things that need to be addressed for this switch to take place in a seamless and a manageable fashion. This is the context leading into our strategy that we're aware of. And so I mentioned the zero emission building plan focused on new construction, as well as the BC Energy Step Code. Over the last 4 years in the implementation of these, we've learned some important lessons that have informed the approach that we're going to take on existing buildings. The first is that it's critical to have clear and consistent requirements from the outset and to show where you're going to go with regulations. This is really important for raising awareness, initiating capacity building, helps give certainty and confidence to industry that they know where we're going and what's going to be required of them. It also catalyzes or as well as incentivizes uptake of technologies, practices, etc. in the short term so that we start to build that industry capacity. The second, we need to put in place actions to support those voluntary leaders. We need incentives in place, and we need to do our due diligence in removing barriers that exist. And barriers could include city permitting barriers. They could include sort of grid infrastructure related barriers. And then finally, you need to put in place supportive programs to help develop the capacity of both building owners and industry, among which could include training, certifications, best practice guides, etc. So how is this translated into our zero emission building retrofit strategy? I'll walk through really quickly the major components of it, and then I'll go back and address each of these 4 major areas in more detail. So first, similar to new buildings, we want to provide a clear signal. So that includes carbon pollution limits that get smaller over time, as well as some prescriptive requirements. And really important to, in the short term, streamline permitting, so it's easier to do this work. The second major piece is to support early action. We're going to be developing decision support tools, as well as planning and implementation support programs. There's currently some incentives out there. We need to increase the number of those and make those more effective. Financing, I think, will play an important role, and we're doing some work to ensure that there's new forms of financing in place, and then regulatory barrier removal. On the industry capacity side, working with industry to identify what are the training needs, and in some cases there might be the need for new certifications as well, depending on the specific sector. Quality installation is an important theme, making sure that the equipment that is installed is done so properly so that building owners are having a positive experience with new technologies. And then on the supply side, ensuring that the right equipment is available in our market. We have a pretty low market share of really high efficiency heat pump equipment in BC compared to other jurisdictions. There's much more efficient equipment in Asia and Japan in particular, other jurisdictions. And so I think hopefully some of this work can lead to getting more efficient equipment in our market within the next decade. And then finally, the fourth one, access to renewable energy. We've been working with BC Hydro, and there needs to be a lot more work going forward to address some of the cost as well as process and just access barriers to upgrading electrical service, as well as switching over heating and hot water loads to electricity in buildings. Fortis is an important partner in ensuring that there's access to renewable natural gas for a broad spectrum of buildings so that that's a viable option for them to meet their carbon pollution reduction targets. And then finally, we need to make sure that we're working with the district energy providers so that we're decarbonizing district energy as well. And these things are all related. We can't just work on these kind of sequentially or in isolation. All of these are going to have to be taking place and are interrelated in terms of influencing the other areas of action in the strategy. And once these are all in place, I think we'll be ready for regulation to come into effect starting in 2025. A little bit of insight into why regulation is necessary to meet that target, if it wasn't obvious from the fact that we need a 5-fold increase in our rate. But some high-level modeling showed us that over the next decade, voluntary action is going to get us about a 27% reduction in emissions, and that we need regulation to get us that additional 23% up to the 50. And that's going to have to be a combination of regulation that impacts multiple sectors. We can't just focus on a single sector. There's opportunities in multiple sectors, and so we're going to have to take advantage of those. I'm going to now drill into each of those 4 main strategy areas in a bit more detail. And once I've run through these, we can pause for our question and answer. So first, setting the carbon limits and streamlining the regulations. Our focus for this is on where we can have the biggest impact and where there's the greatest opportunity for reducing emissions. And in short, that's detached homes and large commercial buildings. Because detached homes, you have simpler mechanical systems, and also the decision-making process for upgrading or switching or making a change is also simple compared to large buildings. There's an opportunity to have regulation impacting these buildings in the short term. I'll get into in a moment what that looks like for detached homes. And then on the commercial side, for large commercial buildings, in particular office and retail, there's often an opportunity for recovering waste heat in these buildings. There's very frequently simultaneous heating and cooling demands taking place, so you can take advantage of technologies like heat recovery. So and as well, these buildings are often managed and owned by sophisticated larger companies that have access to resources, capital, expertise in order to undertake these changes. So these are the two short-term focus areas for regulation. The second, remove energy upgrade requirements for unrelated permitted work. Currently in the city, through a section of our building bylaw, when you come into the city to pull a permit for work to an existing building, you're obliged to make upgrades to that building, including energy efficiency. And so we're going to be looking to remove those requirements, as many of them don't directly contribute to carbon pollution reduction, to take some burden off of the permitting process. We see that as really important, as well as create a more streamlined process for getting heat pumps installed in buildings. So this, for residential buildings, this means making it much easier and streamlined to get sort of a pad-mounted heat pump for residential dwellings. Right now it's a little bit difficult to get approval for the balcony-mounted, like mini split type of systems. We're looking to make that much simpler. And then there's some complications that are often being experienced when installing roof-mounted central heat pump systems, as well as sort of wall or facade-mounted systems that are triggering development permits, building permits, other things that we'd like to avoid just when they're mechanically focused projects. So these are a priority for us to address in the short term. Before we get to regulating, we need to get better data, and also buildings need to take a close look at their emission profile and understand where their emissions are coming from and where their opportunities are for reducing them. And so a key part of this is energy emission reporting or energy benchmarking. So beginning in 2023, for large commercial and large multifamily buildings, we're going to be requiring energy emission annual reporting to the city. This will be via Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And for detached homes, we're working in partnership with Natural Resources Canada, the BC government, to develop a virtual energy emission score tool that's structured. It stems from the EnerGuide assessment database and process. This is intended to be a light touch but effective way for homeowners to understand what their emissions are, as well as to understand where they have opportunities to reduce their emissions. And just another detail in the benchmarking, we're envisioning that to impact buildings greater than 5,000 square meters, with reporting starting in 2023, and the size threshold reducing over time so that more of the commercial building stock and multifamily buildings are required to report on their annual energy use. And then the key part of the regulation would be annual carbon pollution limits. For detached homes, this will be a total annual limit, so tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. We'll, of course, have options in place for deferral, exceptions for low-income or low-income rental homes, so that this is not a punitive measure. But by taking an absolute carbon pollution limit approach to detached homes, it's going to mean that the biggest homes have to take action first, because on a per floor area basis, they're going to have to be much more efficient. And so that's one way also to ensure that equity is included in this approach. For the large commercial buildings that I was mentioning, and later for condos, we're going to take a kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per floor area per meter squared per year. The 2025 limits in both cases are going to impact only the 10 to 20% the worst performing of the building stock. That they'll be able to comply with cost-effective, just efficiency, low-cost measures. Most buildings, in order to meet those limits, those that currently exceed it. And we're looking to put in place a lot of flexibility for compliance. So again, cost-effective measures for those who want to take action, the ability to purchase renewable natural gas, or potentially district energy credits to comply with that. And then there's also will be the option to, if you don't choose to take action, to pay a non-compliance, take out the non-compliance operating permit for that building, which would be priced around the cost of what the city uses for its social price of carbon, which is a $250 per ton fee based on non-compliance. And so a little bit more insight into our thinking for the structure of this regulatory system. These were the key principles that we are guided by. We've already talked about the clear signal. Also really important is that we structure it such that the regulations are aligned with planned or required building investment. So we don't want pollution limits that are so aggressive that most buildings have to take action outside of capital replacement cycles. Some probably will, but we don't want most buildings or a majority of buildings having to do that. Flexibility is really important. I've already spoke to simplifying permitting. They're equitable, that's a key principle. And then these also have to be leading to getting us pretty close to our 50% reduction target by 2030. And then the other piece of this is signaling where we're going with those future limits. So the 2030 limits are going to be much more significant, the 2030 and 2035. This is going to mean that a lot of buildings are going to have to, if they're just approaching it from a mechanical equipment perspective, going to have to switch to fuel pump, to heat pumps in order to comply with the limits, and also, or make a significant investment in something like renewable natural gas. The final piece is that we know that carbon pollution limits don't make sense in all cases and for all building types, and that prescriptive requirements can make sense. Do I have a slide on that? Yeah. So these are kind of our draft thinking on prescriptive requirements. We need to do additional consultation and research on this, but to anticipate announcing or bringing forward regulation within the next 3 years on what this will look like with effective dates before the end of the decade. In commercial buildings, something that looks quite promising is packaged space heating systems. There are a lot of really high efficiency heat pump and hybrid systems that are on the market already. There's been some studies that have been undertaken in the province as well as in the states that show there's a strong business case and also really good carbon reduction potential with these. And so this is one possibility for a prescriptive requirement. And then on the multifamily side, we're also going to do additional research for secondary heating equipment. That could include like rooftop makeup air units, as well as potentially fireplaces. These are secondary uses that there are cost-effective, lower carbon alternatives that we may just require buildings to install. Moving on to the second part of the strategy, support early action. So the first area of supporting early action is planning decision support tools. We're planning on developing a number of these. The first is already underway, a digital homeowner decision support tool. This will be combined with the virtual emission score functionality or tool that I mentioned within the regulatory side. so that homeowners can log on and get information that's customized for their home on their options for taking action to meet future carbon pollution limits, as well as just options for improving their home. They could indicate what they're interested in. Are they interested in air conditioning? Are they interested in lowering their energy bills? Are they interested in a number of other criteria? The tool would help them prioritize what actions they could take based on that. We also see the need for similar tools for condominiums and commercial buildings. Those would be more focused on capital planning and ideally integrate with the capital planning process for those building types, such as the depreciation reports that are required for condominiums in BC. We currently have a number of equipment efficiency incentives available via Clean BC and the utilities. These need to continue and also increase for the strategy to be effective. In addition to those incentives that are currently available for heat pumps, we also need to see some incentives that are out there for related efficiency measures like air tightness and heat recovery ventilation. Windows are important, and actually not just for detached homes, but for multifamily buildings as well. And then finally, looking ahead to pieces of equipment that have strong potential for delivering carbon pollution reductions, we need to put more money and more incentives towards those in the short term so that we can get uptake and learn more about them. One example would be like the packaged rooftop heat pump systems for a wide range of commercial building types. Another key part of our support for early action is the development of retrofit accelerator centers. So I spoke to the decision support tools, and this would be something that homeowner or a business owner could do on their own, but there needs to be some place that they can go to, a website and experts they can call to get guidance on what they should be doing for their building as well. And so we plan to work closely with industry associations to develop these. In the case of houses, it might be something that the city contracts out and maybe does in partnership with the utility companies. For condominiums and commercial buildings, this would certainly be done in partnership with industry associations that already have a broad membership base and are already serving those building types, and just looking to expand the services they provide to include zero carbon focused retrofits, and ensuring that they're staffed up and have the resources to support their members and their buildings in making these transition. Similar to the but also more focused on implementation is demonstration programs and projects. The city's committed to a couple of these already, and we look to expand our work in this area. We have a program that's ready to launch, likely early 2021, focused on market rental buildings. This is in partnership with Landlord BC in the province of British Columbia. This includes significant incentives for envelope and heat pump related work, energy assessments, implementation support. We're also working on the development of a similar program for non-market housing buildings in the city in partnership with the province, BC Nonprofit Housing Association, BC Housing, and then two demonstration projects that are already well underway that we're quite excited about. There's the Reframed Initiative being led by the Pembina Institute with a number of other partners that's focused on both carbon pollution reduction and seismic resilient retrofits for non-market housing buildings. And then we have a deep retrofit pilot project that's happening, it's being led by Fortis BC, where it's their largest DSM investment to date. They're looking to invest up to $10 million in a deep retrofit of a seniors supportive housing building in the west end of Vancouver that's undertaking both envelope as well as gas absorption heat pump retrofits to meet the domestic hot water and the space heating needs of that building. The next area is building industry capacity. So what we heard, and I'm going to go quickly through this section because Christine is going to speak to it in more depth in a moment, is that it's really important to provide clarity to owners, contractors, the whole industry on where we're going. So that's something that the city needs to do more work on going forward. This session is the start of that going forward. There's a few specific instances where we may need additional support or requirements so that we're sure that there's qualified tradespeople doing work, in particular for detached homes and the folks that are doing the installation on that equipment. Financing is going to be important going forward. We're quite interested in the potential for property assessed financing, or PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy is what the acronym is for, where the financing is attached to your property tax bill, and enabling really low interest and long amortization period for those loans, which also allows that to be off book for the building or homeowner, which is important on the commercial side. The city, with money from the federal government, is launching a regional low carbon Cities Canada Center that's going to be focused on financing and incentives for existing buildings for retrofits. There's going to be announcements of that coming up potentially before the end of this year, and that is intended to be launched next year. There's going to be a center that serves the whole greater Vancouver region. And then finally, we have really important work that's happening through a diverse coalition of industry as well as government around which the name is to be determined, but it's essentially the BC Building Electrification Coalition. The roadmap is going to be released later this fall, and that's going to speak to a number of the different things that need to take place from government, from industry, if we're going to be successful in reducing carbon pollution from existing buildings, with a focus on what needs to happen from a heat pump and electrification perspective to contribute to that decarbonization transition. And then the final area is access to renewable energy. First, we can't give up on efficiency programs. We need to be minimizing energy demand. This is going to be important whether you're taking an approach of switching to electric heat pumps or you're going to be meeting your carbon reduction through renewable natural gas. You want to minimize demand for this to be cost effective. On the hydro side, we need a change in rate structure so that it's not punitive towards those who are electrifying. This is a problem both for residential and commercial rates right now. There's some early signals that hydro is looking at the development of voluntary rate classes for those buildings that are electrifying to make it much more cost effective, and that would be critical. There's also the costs associated with increasing service and connection that should be addressed for this to be more cost effective transition. On the Fortis side, I've mentioned renewable natural gas, and I think critical to the flexibility is having these carbon pollution limits, which are performance-based instead of prescriptive, which keeps the door open and makes it much more flexible for how you meet these requirements. And then finally, for district energy systems, the city-owned neighborhood energy utility is the city's making a commitment for that to be zero carbon by before 2030. And for the privately owned district energy systems in the building, we're looking at making some changes in tax treatment that will help facilitate their investment in low carbon infrastructure, as well as exploring the creation of a renewable energy credit scheme that would help monetize some bigger investments that they might make in decarbonizing their whole district energy system. Great. That was a lot of information. This is the point where we pause for our first set of Q&A. Oh, we're doing okay. I only went over a few minutes what I was supposed to do. So, Sarah, are folks going to be entering their questions in the chat? Maybe you can say a word about how you'd like to manage that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Micah. If you have any sort of questions, please feel free to enter them into either the chat box or the questions box, which is located on the right-hand side of your webinar control panel. So we'll just wait a couple moments to see if any questions come in.
I don't know if it's also, there's the option for folks to raise their hand and ask the question. Is that something that
we do
would
have
be
actually a couple questions coming in? Can you
awesome?
address the hydro capacity in Vancouver now versus the gas load?
So on the hydro capacity side, we're currently in the middle of a study in partnership with the BC Hydro to understand the distribution infrastructure capacity, and this is looking at what's happening today as well as forecasting what's going to happen over the next 30 years. And so we're looking at it not just for buildings, but for transportation as well. And we're looking at a number of different scenarios, electrification scenarios, to understand where and when pinch points might occur in the city, so that we can, so that the city and hydro can anticipate what needs to be done and to try and find cost-effective ways to address those pinch points. This is something we'll certainly share in more detail once the study is done. It's still in progress, but I think the initial results show that there's not going to be nothing to be concerned about in the next decade. It's after that when there may be when things like demand response measures and other measures might become much more critical to mitigating peak loads or reducing peak loads for certain specific geographic areas in the city. And then, I mean, on the Fortis side, for renewable natural gas, there has been a shortage of renewable natural gas available. They haven't been accepting new customers. That supply constraint, my understanding, is being addressed, and they'll be open to new customers very shortly. And they're working hard to bring online more RNG for customers. So that'll be important for that work to continue going forward as well.
We do have a couple more questions coming in just now. Is there an estimate as to how much it will cost the average family in a detached home to upgrade their homes to meet the new standards by 2030?
That's a great question. It's going to be a cost range. So I'll start with 2025 briefly. That's going to be largely like quite low cost things. We've done some preliminary costing, and for the typical home that's to meet the 2025 limit, it's going to be a couple of $1,000s or less. You're not going to have to switch out mechanical equipment in most cases, or if you do, you can meet the requirement with cost savings because you probably have really inefficient things in place. For 2030, there's going to be more costs involved, but we're hoping most of the people who make those investments, they're just going to be incremental to investments that they would have to make anyways because of the lifetime of equipment in their homes, whether it's their hot water tank or their furnace or the boiler. Like, these are investments that need to happen on a 10 to 25 year time frame anyways. And so most folks who have to make that investment, it's going to be just incremental costs beyond what they would have to be doing it otherwise. And it is gonna vary up quite a bit. And so I don't have a dollar number to throw at you, but it'll probably it could range from a few $100s to much more. But given the diversity of building types, it will be a range of costs associated with that.
What is the timeline for the BC Hydro rate structure and connection cost changes?
Yeah, very good question. So the province is wrapping up right now the phase 2 review of BC Hydro. That the phase 2 is focused on BC Hydro's contribution towards meeting the province's greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And I've seen a draft of that phase 2 review, and it includes the introduction of voluntary rate classes for both like industrial users and commercial users, and residential users, for those that have installed heat pumps, have installed electric vehicles, have electric vehicle charging. So I'm guessing that these phase 2 review, we have a provincial election happening now. Hopefully it gets released this year. Once that is released, I anticipate those being worked into the next rate application that Hydro puts forward, which I believe, I'm fuzzy on this. I think it's happening. I think they're working on their next rate package to the BC Utility Commission for it's happening sometime in 2022. So we're a couple of years away from these changes actually taking in effect, but the gears are in motion. I'm hoping there'll be a strong signal from the provincial government to Hydro. Like that's required. I think they need to be directed to take action. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. But hopefully that direction comes before the end of this year, and then a couple of years for this to play out in the rate process and the DSM programs as well.
So we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to move on to the second portion of our presentation. There will be time for other questions at the end of the presentation, so if you have any, please continue to type them in. The last question for this Q&A period will be, was any consideration given to the source of energy and the related emissions from those sources?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, the emission intensity of the different fuel types in British Columbia plays a big role in shaping our strategy. That said, the city doesn't have authority to prescribe different fuel types for buildings to use. We can set performance or efficiency requirements, but we can't prescribe what fuel types a building use. So because gas is more carbon intensive than electricity in BC, there's going to have to be more effort on gas efficiency and reducing gas usage in buildings. That's just the nature of it. Yeah, the short answer is yes, of course. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Micah. And we're actually going to move on to Christine's portion of the presentation. So Christine, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me today. As I said in the intro, I'm Christine Gustafson. I'm the principal consultant at Harbor Green Consulting, and also the project lead on this commercial HVAC trades readiness needs assessment. Partnering with me on the project was Matt. He's a HVAC services manager at Harbor Green HVAC, and he's a journeyman refrigeration mechanic with a A-gas ticket and 15 years commercial HVAC in Vancouver. So yeah, as I mentioned, City of Vancouver commissioned Harbor Green to connect with the HVAC industry earlier this year in the spring right during the COVID transition. And we were asked to develop some recommendations on how the city might help support a transition from gas and space and water heating to commercial use of renewable energy systems. And so I'll give you a presentation today of the little overview of the project, some of the key takeaways, a retrofit industry status and opportunities. But really what I want to focus in is what we heard from the industry on critical success factors and the recommendations. So in the project, we were given the task to provide a status of the retrofit industry, so who's involved and what the current landscape is and what the opportunities are, and again, the needs assessment and recommendation. What we found, there's three main takeaways, and we'll delve into these in a little bit more detail in a minute, but in general, there was good support for the city goals. Again, I'm talking commercial retrofit. So throughout the study, we spoke with 6 industry organizations, 7 mechanical contracting companies, 7 suppliers and manufacturers, and some training stakeholders as well. And most of the people we spoke to had a good understanding of the need for change and that change is coming, although there was relatively low to moderate awareness of the specifics of what that meant and how their business might be impacted. The second key takeaway was around a well-positioned industry. So again, the folks we talked to viewed change as a natural part of the industry. And what we learned was that large mechanical contracting companies are most likely to lead these major retrofits in commercial buildings. So it's a little bit of a different structure than a single family dwellings. And these large mechanical contracting companies, they often have a mix of trades on staff, and they can change that mix depending on the project that needs to get done. And then the last key takeaways is, there's definitely some key opportunities around communications. So the need to build awareness and seed some advocates within the industry and provide some lead time for that training and response from industry. An opportunity for growth in the refrigeration mechanic trade in particular. An opportunity for technology specific training, so layered on top of that really core trades program. And then a key opportunity for support. So what we heard quite often was that the HVAC technicians were really the takers of design that was specified by building owners and managers and their design engineers, and they were the implementers of this. So in terms of the retrofit industry status and opportunities, Mike has given us a really kind of thorough overview of where the city's planning on going. So I won't spend too much time here, but this is basically the start of the conversations that we had with the industry folks. We spoke to plumbers and gas fitters and HVAC technicians. As you are well aware, I'm sure everybody's very busy, and there is a short-term competition for trades. Workers may not be available to do the job that needs to get done. We also learned that HVAC and refrigeration mechanic trades are viewed as high road jobs. So basically what that means is the companies hire highly skilled technicians. Their workers' pay tends to increase with training and experience and qualifications, tends to pay more. So that was interesting. And then again, the large mechanical companies doing the majority of the retrofit installations. So we looked at the size of the challenge relative to industry's capacity and the current city goals under a few different scenarios. And again, Mike has given a little overview on that. Basically, the takeaway from this slide is try and replace the systems on their natural rate of replacement. So when they're due to be replaced anyways. And what we found is that, if the regulation requires that systems are replaced before their end of life, then that may exceed the current industry capacity. And obviously, with more renewable energy systems on the rise, the need for refrigeration mechanics skills and expertise is also on the rise. So we'll get into the recommendations in a few minutes here, but I just wanted to mention that our questions were centered around how do we support the trades, but conversations took a much broader path. As it turns out, training is a piece of what's needed, but it's really a relatively small one. So we felt it was important to reflect the conversations that we had on a whole, and what the project participants wanted to communicate to the city. So in that, we have identified a few critical success factors that were derived from our conversations. So availability, solutions, renewable space and water heating solutions, they must exist. Awareness, the building owners and managers and design engineers, have to be aware of them, but then that has to translate down to the HVAC technicians as well. Around acceptance, the HVAC technicians need to, accept the city's goals as sound and viable. They need to believe that the systems that they're installing are of equal or superior performance in order to really get behind them. Affordability, again, these systems have to be cost effective in order to be spec'd and to be implemented. And accessibility, both in the products being available and certified in Canada, but also accessibility to training and support for the HVAC guys that are installing and servicing the equipment. That extra layer of technology specific training and support is critical to the ongoing success. So with all that in mind, we have kind of 4 major recommendations around communications, growth, training, and support. And I'll give you a high-level overview of those now. So the first recommendation has 2 sub-recommendations, and that's really around communications. So the need to develop a comprehensive general communications plan to raise awareness for the city's renewable energy plans and targets. So this was, a resounding message from almost everybody we talked to. We can adjust, but we need a clear market signal. Again, awareness was kind of low to moderate on the specifics. And so people really felt like they needed a clear market signal early on to adjust and change and plan for the future. And then, so that's kind of the overarching message, but then there was also, we need this HVAC industry, sub message to provide some lead time for the technical training, to also build a community of advocates. They'd like a little bit more detail on the suggestions for individual actions, perhaps some case studies, which I am glad to see we're going to get to today as well. Perhaps some letters of commitment or support from key industry players to kind of normalize what's coming. Opportunities for training and recertification. I know suppliers and manufacturers do a good job of getting their training into market, and we just need to raise awareness around that. And project planning supports available from the city. So that's nice to see that that's been considered in the city strategy as well. The second key recommendation was around support for growth in the HVAC trade in general, and 2 sub-recommendations on this as well. So the first being, we need to support outreach to high school students and provide them the information around what a career in refrigeration mechanic or HVAC trades looks like, and inspire more students to enter the program. And there was a lot of good information on why that should be the case. You know, lots of people that I talked to had really good things to say about the HVAC trade. And there's a few kind of key pieces listed there on the slide. Also looking for opportunities to advocate for more funding for the trade schools to increase their capacity, and then increase the number of students, and then increase the number of technicians available. So most of the study participants we talked to, said it's difficult to get refrigeration mechanics and to get good ones. And so we need to look at how to increase that, both by bringing more students into the trade straight out of high school, and then creating space for them in the programs. So the ITA has a really nice program that we can use or leverage. HRAI is also a strong advocate. So there's definitely a lot of work going on in industry that the city can kind of partner with various industry organizations and get some movement. The third recommendation is around technologies training. So looking at supporting industry organizations or training institutes like PCIT, suppliers and manufacturers, and providing some incentives for that really technology specific training. The refrigeration mechanic apprentice program provides a key foundation for HVAC design, installation, and service. But what we heard is that it's not as nimble when it comes to covering these advanced and evolving technologies. And it's interesting to note, continual education was viewed by many of the stakeholders as just as what we need to do to remain relevant and have a successful business. But some of the smaller service-based companies maybe don't have the same view as the large big mechanicals, so they might require some supports and some incentives to get their technicians to take the training. Lots of good detail, or lots I could cover, but I'm just trying to give it a high-level overview and keep it within the time. So the last key recommendation is around support for building owners, managers, and engineers. And there was a number of sub-recommendations around this. And as I mentioned at the onset, our focus initially going into this study was how can we support the trades? But what we quickly heard was, the trades are the ones implementing whatever the building owners and managers and engineers specify, and they felt that they could be flexible and implement whatever was specified with enough time to train up on additional technologies. So there were a few recommendations in this space as well. So using that communications package developed, target messaging also to the building owners, managers, and engineers to raise awareness around city goals and projects. Developing a program that encourages building owners to identify the end-of-life equipment and plan for the retrofits. Certainly we heard that if it's not planned for, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a like-for-like replacement. So there's lots of information out there and lots of data sets and expertise that we can leverage to help plan for these things. Also happy to see this in Micah's strategy there, that considering developing some online tools or business case templates or calculators to support that decision making. Making it easy for business owners to consider alternatives. And then addressing the issues. So there was a lot of, kind of structural barriers that were identified by the by the project participants that we talked to, including some that we've already talked about: electrical grid capacity, panel capacity, cost of fuels, decommissioning and disposal of materials. So there's a lot of questions out there that need to be addressed in the communications that are being developed. The city, it was suggested that the city can also show leadership through their building retrofits and share their experiences. Also highlighting case studies from other jurisdictions, and finally considering developing some in-house expertise and offering support to design engineers and contractors during their project planning. So again, just to recap, we spoke to a number of folks in the industry, and here we are again today speaking to you guys. Tried to go over what we have heard to date, and happy to hear what resonated with you today. And then I know Mike has outlined an additional opportunity for stakeholder engagement following the November meeting with council. But in general, what we've heard is there's good support. Again, we just need that clear market signal to understand where the city is wanting to go, so that there's time to adjust. And then there's also some really key opportunities that the city needs to take a leadership role on, communicating and growing, building more supports for training and building owners and managers and engineers. So that is myself and Matt, and happy to just pause briefly here for a few questions on this, and then if there's interest, I can go over some work with that. We've done similar work on the Part 9 residential side.
Great, thank you so much, Christine. So if anybody has any questions for Christine, please, once again, you can type them into the questions and answers box or into the chat. So we do have a question come in. I guess that means we can market the HVAC tech as a green job to the local high schools.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's many benefits of the HVAC trade, as we discussed, and Matt on the studies, commercial HVAC, commercial refrigeration mechanic, good entrepreneurial expertise and opportunities, and yeah, well-paying, flexible, local, resilient, green. It's got lots of good things going for it that I think a lot of high school students would be interested in hearing more about.
Another question has come in. Were there any discussions about regulating the trades? So much training is available, but if it's not in the BC Building Code, contractors don't take the training.
Yes, I think Micah might be able to speak more to what's going on in the permitting side of things. I can speak from the energy efficiency kind of side of things. So basically, the government utilities now are building a program registered contractor network. This would be for Part 9, I guess I'm slipping into. But that would, I think that's absolutely critical to understand, who's doing these retrofits and do they have the qualifications. What I heard through the commercial program participants is, the base trades training is absolutely fundamental. Like, we don't want to mess with that, and I have no interest in that, but adding layers of technology specific training might be something to look at. And I think there's some movement on kind of like a micro credentialing as well.
Another question. You said large mechanical contractors are supportive and well positioned. Did you include small contractors in your study?
We did try to reach out to a few small contractors, and Matt actually used to work for one, so we had some good insights there. It's a different market, as I'm sure you're well aware. They're more busy and responding to the needs of the day. So definitely there's going to need to be some more supports for those smaller contractors. But we also felt like there was a little bit more lead time for them. What we heard was that is the large mechanical contractors that are often doing the big like change outs, the big retrofits, and they're a little more organized and have the variety of trades within their staff that they can be flexible with. The smaller companies we heard generally come up on the service side of things, and so there's a little bit of more time to work with that sector. But definitely happy to engage anybody who's interested in chatting.
How can CIPH BC, MCA BC, and TECA work with you to provide training?
I think waiting for that clear market signal from the city, so finding out what that is, identifying what the training gaps are, and then working through the city to raise awareness of the training that those organizations offer. So getting that information built into their communications campaign that's targeted at the mechanical contracting community.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christine. And I don't think we have any further questions, so I think we're going to pass the presentation back on to Micah for the third portion.
Did you want me to go over the part 9 just briefly? I think we have a little bit of time.
Sure. Here, what I can do.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So let's see if we can get that all on the screen. So apart from Harbor Green Consulting, I am the project manager for a group called the Home Performance Stakeholder Council. And we recently completed some work for the city to review some roadmaps that we had developed back in 2018 and look at them through the lens of what the city is considering for regulations and provide a recommendation summary. Just a little bit about the HPSC, as many of you might not be familiar. We're a not-for-profit industry organization started in 2015, working to organize the home performance market. So that's single-family dwelling, residential retrofit is our focus. We have been engaging folks in the HVAC industry, insulation, fenestration, renovation, energy advisors, as well as the utility and government sector. When we talk about home performance, we're talking about lowering energy bills, improving comfort, reducing our environmental impacts, improving indoor air quality, health and safety. The HPSC does this through 4 key pillars of advocacy, market growth, capacity building, and quality workmanship. So as a result of a lot of engagement from 2015 to 2018, we brought people to the table, talked about the landscape, talked about the needs, developed a vision, and then eventually developed this roadmap summary of like, how do we get to where we want to be with a more robust home performance industry here in BC. And it really boiled down to 2 things, demand. So demand for those home performance projects from the customers, and then supply, the availability of quality contractors to do home performance work. And these 2 things must be addressed in order to realize the market potential. And there were 5 priority areas listed there. increasing awareness, excuse me, defining and increasing the capacity of trained home performance professionals. Those clear market signals, again, is definitely a theme, and building a clear market brand to communicate, and then establishing functioning and systematic consultation between industry and government. That's been our focus for the last couple of years of implementing the roadmap. So again, the work we did for the City of Vancouver was to review those roadmaps and kind of really pull out any high priority recommendations and get those in the forefront again. So the first recommendation was really around supporting the existing infrastructure that the HPSC's developed. And I mentioned that just a while ago around the registered contractor system. So the HPSC's been working to define, what training and what skills and what certifications both businesses and contractors need in this market in order to do a quality installation, and that's all coming together. Primarily supported by BC Hydro, Fortis, and the ministry. There's definitely opportunity for the City of Vancouver to leverage that work. The second recommendation is around building that consumer demand. So industry development, the HPSC has been focusing on the supply side, not dissimilar from the commercial sector. Like, there's relatively low awareness and low demand around homeowners. So basically, when contractor goes out to a home, if the homeowner is not demanding renewable technologies, then the contractor is going to do whatever they're comfortable with and respond to the requests of the homeowner. Another key point that we want to highlight for the city was the sector variance. So I spoke about HVAC, insulation, fenestration, energy advisors, and renovators. They're all at very different places in terms of their industry development. So the insulation sector, for example, remains in infancy, relatively disorganized state as when it's compared to HVAC or the renovation sectors. So just a recommendation for the city to be conscious to manage and monitor the impacts of various policies and programs, and the individual sector's ability to be responsive and mobilize energy retrofit projects at scale. The fourth recommendation is around long-term objectives. So again, just recognizing that this is a long-term project. There's no quick fix, and the industry members in our network and the HPSC network requested multiple years to prepare for changes and develop solutions and get the training done in order to maximize the potential opportunities that the city is presenting. Collaboration opportunities, definitely with the city and province and utilities. This is not a unique problem to the city, opportunity to the City of Vancouver, and definitely should be collaborating. And then the sixth recommendation from the HPSC is the whole home approach. So perhaps even more important than in the commercial sector, the HPSC advocates for a whole home approach to residential retrofit. So envelope first, addressing the insulation and the windows and the home's envelope, thereby reducing the heat load or cooling load of the home, and getting right-sized equipment in there for the heating system. So the next steps, obviously the council report in 2020, and then the city has scheduled some additional consultation with the HPSC early next year. And the HPSC continues to work on our registered contractor system with the goal of implementing it by April 2022. And just thinking about what we've heard from the HVAC sector is around whereas in the commercial sector, the requirement for refrigeration mechanic or a plumber or other trade is relatively clear, and permits are required for that. That's not as clear in the residential sector. So our HVAC sector council has recommended that we look at adopting, a Class B refrigeration mechanic, similar to the Class A, Class B gas fitter, to right size the trades qualification for the residential retrofit market. So that was just a very high level overview on that. Lots to say on both the residential and commercial sector, but happy to take a few questions on the residential sector now if you like.
Okay, we actually do have a question that is coming, Christine. Regarding the CEAP, is the city clear on the industry's concerns and barriers?
I think that's going to be a question for Micah. Okay. That climate emergency action plan, is the city aware of? I mean, certainly from my perspective, we've been in close communication with the city. They've worked with the HPSC over the last number of years. I feel like they have a good understanding of the barriers and the differences between residential and commercial, but if Micah wants to speak to that.
Perfect. So we'll just wait a couple more seconds before we will pass it back on to Micah to do the third section of the presentation.
Yeah, just briefly on that last question, and we've tried to reach out to a diversity of stakeholders in the last 9 months to provide input into the zero emission building retrofit strategy. For the overall climate emergency action plan, there's also been public engagement, several rounds of public engagement. So it's not, it hasn't been exhaustive. But we are bringing forward a strategy, and then the next step is to do another round of consultation to develop actual regulations and to get input into specific programs. So as long as the strategy is sound, I think we're, and hopefully most folks in industry don't see any major red flags. I think in the next round of Q&A, after I walk through the case studies, I'd love to hear from folks if you do feel like there's some major red flags or key issues that need to be addressed. And I'll have a list of questions. That's one of them. It'd be great for us to hear at this time so that we can be prepared to address those in the next round of engagement that comes up.
Yeah, and I would just echo that from an HPSC's perspective. We've kind of given like high level feedback of what we've heard from the industry. Same with the commercial side. The project that I did is kind of your general feedback. Now that there's some specifics on the table, as Micah said, there needs to be like additional consultation to really understand like the actual impacts.
Perfect. So we have no other questions at this time. So Micah, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Great. Is my screen showing now?
Yes, you look great.
Okay, and the presentation is back up?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So the last little piece I wanted to walk through before having a chance for a broader discussion was a few case studies, and these are meant to be illustrative. I'm not going to go into all of the details on these projects right now in the interest of time, but certainly if folks are interested in learning more about each of these projects, I can point you to additional resources and information to get the details. A couple of these, the city has written up formally as case studies, which I'm happy to distribute, and others have been put together by third-party organizations. And so the first that I want to highlight, this comes out of a really interesting and sort of large pilot project in the United States, in the Pacific Northwest, done by the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, NEA, where they were looking at the packaged rooftop systems. Their focus was small commercial buildings, those that were 25,000 square feet and smaller. They looked at both office buildings and restaurants, and actually there was a dormitory thrown in there as well. And there were 7 buildings spread across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. And so most of you are probably familiar with the system design on the left-hand side of the screen. You have the rooftop unit. You have outdoor air coming in. It's heated and distributed, and then there's a return air that's pulling that out of the building for exhaust. The system that they piloted in these retrofits was, the first step is to separate the ventilation from the heating, and then to use super high efficient equipment for each of those functions. So for the heating, employ zone level heating or cooling using a heat pump, and then for the ventilation, using a high efficiency heat recovery ventilator. And across these building types, they found in the implemented projects a 60%, average 60% reduction in HVAC energy use, which translated into significant reductions in carbon pollution, and a decent business case for most building types as well for doing this work. The city partnered with the province and BC Hydro to undertake a desktop study to understand the potential for this type of retrofit in a number of different commercial building types in BC, which I hope to be able to share the results of that sometime soon. But it showed similarly very promising potential as well. And so I'm hopeful that a specific incentive for this type of system will be offered via Clean BC program and BC Hydro in the next cycle of equipment incentives that are offered by the province. The second approach that I want to highlight is heat recovery in large office buildings. This is a building in downtown Vancouver, owned by Golden Properties, 26 stories, more than 26,000 square meters of floor area, construction in 1968. This owner is fairly unique in that they created a target, an objective 10 years ago that they wanted to decarbonize this building. And they set about creating a plan for how to do that. And they went through the whole building comprehensively, looking at all the systems to think, okay, what do we need to do in order to accomplish this goal? In tandem with how do we modernize this building, replace aging systems, and keep it a profitable and productive asset for them. And so the list of upgrades on the screen is not comprehensive, but I'm highlighting the ones that are specific to the HVAC system they undertook. So they did a cooling plant modernization, which resulted in huge electricity savings and cost savings for them. They converted to electric boilers, which was, not cost neutral, but certainly not prohibitively costly because of the electricity savings they were able to realize through other projects in the building. They upgraded their air handling units, which also had huge electricity savings. And then the project that resulted in ultimately the greenhouse gas reductions, the carbon pollution reductions, was the installation of a heat recovery chiller, which as of this spring was resulting in 80% reduction in their gas consumption. Through further commissioning work that's going to take place in the next couple of years, they're aiming to get that to 100% reduction in their gas consumption. And so this project was quite useful in illustrating that you do need to take a long-term perspective and approach if you're going to successfully completely decarbonize buildings. Now, the limits, the carbon pollution limits the city's going to set and the regulations we put in place are not going to drive towards this type of reduction in the short term, but that's where buildings need to go eventually. And so if you're able to incorporate this into your capital planning of the long term, you can certainly do this on a decade time scale and do it cost effectively with energy cost savings and a decent business case associated with it. Right now, the Zero Emission Building Exchange is writing up a formal case study of this project. Should be available by the end of this year. The next one I'd like to highlight is a similar opportunity that exists in large commercial retail, again using heat recovery. The city's written up a case study of this project, which I can distribute to folks if you're interested. The Coquitlam Center Mall, large commercial retail facility, they were able to reduce their gas usage 70% through a heat recovery chiller. And in this case, it was a very attractive business case associated with this project, and the management was quite happy with this opportunity. In most projects, you don't have such an attractive business case, but in many of the largest buildings, it does exist. Maybe on a decade timescale instead of that simple payback of 4.5 years, but certainly it's you can see savings over the long term. And then finally, I wanted to just touch on a couple of promising technologies in the multifamily space. We have a few case studies that were written up through the city's Greenest City Scholar program, where we have graduate students undertake research. I can point you to a couple of those reports if you're interested in. But in general, it's a bit more, there's a few more challenges in multifamily buildings than in commercial buildings or detached homes. But that said, there are some sort of specific technologies that are quite promising. The first is package terminal heat pumps. These are really high efficient units that have compressor, the evaporator, the heat distribution components all integrated into a single unit, and they typically have 1 or 2 outdoor exhaust units that come off the backside that can either go through a window or a wall. These can be in smaller suites, can be very effective in heating and cooling, and we've been seeing a lot of interest in uptake in this by individual condo owners in the city. The next is makeup air units. These are the units that provide conditioned air to the common areas and corridors in large multifamily buildings. There's a number of both heat pump and sort of hybrid heat pump and gas units that are available on the market. They often have a positive business case associated with them, though from a simple payback perspective, it's sometimes on a 7, 8, or 10-year time frame, not a quick 3 or 4 year payback, which many folks are looking for. But this is a technology that through Clean BC they offer an additional higher incentive amount. We're hoping that can increase as well, because we think there's a lot of potential with this one. And then the final technology to highlight is heat pumps, central heat pumps to provide domestic hot water in multifamily buildings. There's a couple of different options available in the market. You can either take, there's a CO2 heat pump that's available from Sandin. It's the only one in North America right now that's widely available. That's popular because you're able to chain together a bunch of these units, and because of their small size, you'd be more flexible in where you place them in a building. BC Housing has been using these in a couple of their existing non-market housing buildings for retrofits. And then you have also the larger air-to-water heat pumps as well that are some more common in commercial applications, but are being used for domestic hot water in multifamily buildings as well. Now these tend to have a poor business case from just an energy cost perspective, but they are they're certainly very viable from a technology perspective for supplying domestic hot water. And this is also one of those technologies that I wanted to highlight as there's a huge opportunity for bringing in more efficient equipment from other, that's available in other jurisdictions, is not available here. Hopefully through some of the work that we do collectively as government and industry, we create enough demand that we can get the super high efficient models certified and imported into Canada, or developed sort of domestically or more in the North American market, so that we start to see these models that get COPs of 4, 5, 6, which are available on the market in Japan, but we don't have available for sale here yet. So yeah, that was just a brief overview of a few technologies and a few approaches for different building types that we think will become much more common and we see as promising for meeting our carbon pollution objectives. I'd like to transition just to the last piece of our session. Open it up again for folks with any questions on the content that we've gone through, and also wanted to put a few questions up on the screen that we're interested specifically in hearing from your response to. The first set is around your level of comfort with the proposed approach that we've talked about from a regulatory perspective. And then, what else could be added or modified to increase that level of comfort? Have we missed anything? And then, as I mentioned, we're going to enter a second phase of analysis and consultation. What are the key issues that you would like to see addressed as we move into this? And then finally, if you can think about this as well, how would you like to be involved or participate in the process going forward? So yeah, please send in either your questions or your responses to my questions for you. That'd be great.
So we actually already have a question. The first question is, what was the ROI on that first example you gave? It looks like it would take 21 years to pay back.
The ROIs varied quite a bit. I think you're talking about the packaged rooftop setup where we separated the heating and the ventilation. From memory, I think the ROI on the pilot systems varied from order of 5 years up to like more than 25 years. There's quite a range in ROI depending on the specific building. So yeah, it's not an investment that someone would make from a cash flow basis. It's more of one that seems quite viable from meeting the needs of a building, improving ventilation, significantly reducing carbon pollution. It's not something that is going to increase your cash flow in the short term.
Micah, if it's okay, I would like to go back to some of the questions that we got from the first part of your presentation, just while we're waiting for
Yeah,
some other questions to come in.
absolutely.
Any opportunities or thoughts on electrical solar batteries, and the ability to add unused power to the grid? How can we get involved to help with hydronic systems and proper air to water heat pump piping for safe operation?
Great. Yeah, a couple of questions there. So I guess the first on solar and battery storage potentially for solar. As the cost of battery storage continues to go down going forward in the future, it's certainly going to look more economically viable. Right now, solar PV, the business case does not look very good, at least in BC. We don't have enough solar potential here for the business case to look that good. That said, cost of solar PV continues to go down. Cost of battery storage continues to go down. So sometime in the 2030s, that could become a really important either peak demand mitigation application at a building scale, where the buildings of the future might have some amount of battery storage on site because it becomes quite cost effective. And they may have some solar as well to depending on what the load curve looks like. They may choose to have solar PV as well. I think the second part of the question was more around maybe Sarah, could you repeat? It was around plumbing standards associated with
Yeah, let me just find
hydronic heating systems, or
let me just find the question again. Hold on, because once I answer it, give me 1 second. Second part was, how can we get involved to help with hydronic systems and proper air to water heat pump piping for safe operation?
So maybe folks, if the person who asked that question could send me an email, and we can talk offline about that. The city is working with industry to both identify training needs as well for contractors who install air to water heat pumps in particular in residential buildings. And if that's the space that the person asking the question is interested in, then I can certainly connect you with the staff in the city who are working in that area. And yeah, we'd welcome input or involvement in the development of requirements around training for the installation of that equipment, as well as identifying either development of new training or promoting or supporting existing training programs that exist to help the quality of installation for those systems.
Perfect, thank you. Does equipment maintenance cost increase with high efficient equipment? Is this increase or savings calculated into the ROI?
Yeah, it's gonna vary. I think in some cases the equipment maintenance may increase. There's certainly a learning curve from equipment operators for larger buildings, and that's one of the areas that we've identified as being important for providing funding in the short term, something that we're going to be doing for the non-market housing sector, identifying, helping develop training modules for building operators. But yeah, one of the, I think, key areas of discovery and is around how to properly design, install, and operate the high efficiency equipment so that you're maximizing its useful lifetime and not resulting in a significant increase in operational costs. If you use a heat pump in an application it's not designed for, you might get 10 years out of some component of that heat pump as opposed to the manufacturer advertised like 25-year lifetime. And so there's these types of concerns that pop up and you hear examples of that. And so it is something that we hope to, the city hopes to play a role in helping build capacity through the development of case studies and working with organizations like the Zero Emission Building Exchange to help disseminate information on best practices so that we're setting ourselves up for success. I mean, we clearly don't want to take a huge hit in terms of equipment reliability or operational costs with this shift to high efficiency equipment. And so it's something that we're going to have to work on collectively to make sure that it's not we don't run into any problems in that front.
Another question, this one's a little bit long. I appreciate it is a lesser of two evils discussion. What does the risk analysis data show for the relying on single source energy, electricity, for an entire jurisdiction versus having redundancy with the natural gas infrastructure and electricity supply? Are stakeholders comfortable eliminating redundancy and perhaps becoming less resilient?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're not suggesting that we should move 100% to electricity in this strategy. We're highlighting the need to focus on high efficiency mechanical equipment, and heat pumps are going to play a big role in that. Due to, I guess, the efficiency characteristics of and the potential of different types of heat pumps, we think that's mostly going to be electric heat pumps, though gas absorption heat pumps, I think, have some interesting applications and could see sizable market share for some building types. And yeah, I think the other piece to highlight with the strategy is that the climate in Vancouver is really ideal for heat pumps. We spend 90%, 85-90% of our time in the sweet spot for the operational efficiency of heat pumps, and then we have 2, 3 in a cold year, 4 weeks of the year where it's that operating efficiency of the heat pump decreases significantly. Now, there's no reason why you can't have gas in your building for peaking in that situation, or for backup. And these hybrid approaches make a lot of sense economically. To have, if you're talking about space heating, to have a system in place where when it drops below 5 degrees C or 0 degrees C, depending on the specific efficiency of your heat pump, then you kick over to your gas to meet that peak heating need. So these dual fuel approaches make a lot of sense, and renewable natural gas is going to play an important role. It's supply constrained, and so if we have the most efficient systems as possible, then we can have enough our renewable natural gas supply to meet those needs. It won't work if we're using it for everything. It will work well for select applications and for definitely for peaking, definitely for backup, and also in hybrid systems as well.
We do have quite a few questions still coming in, Micah, so I don't know how long you would like to answer the questions for. We'll take one more before you do your your little wrap up there. Hello, there was a question in the first part of the presentation pertaining to the carbon content of the source of energy. It seems that an implied aspect of the question was that in past years, a significant portion of clean hydro energy was exported to California and substituted by inexpensive coal-generated hydro from Alberta. On the other side, Fortis is looking for ways to introduce more RNG on the market. How those two aspects are going to be factored into this energy and CO2 balance?
Yeah, so BC Hydro has a provincial mandated clean energy target, and they publish annually the greenhouse gas intensity of the grid supplied electricity in the province. Last year, that was 95% clean energy, hydro supplied energy. And in calculating that, the grid average, they take into consideration the exports and imports from other jurisdictions. So that's included. And going forward, as we take a carbon pollution limit approach to buildings, if there's a significant change in the supply of electricity, the generation source for electricity in the province, then buildings would have to adjust. Now, if we're focusing on highly efficient mechanical systems and highly efficient buildings, that shouldn't require a huge departure from what we're doing. This approach of it articulating the strategy, the approach would still be the same. It might change things around the edges, but it's still going to mean that heat pumps play a major role, and they're going to be essential to meeting the greenhouse gas reduction targets.
So we're just coming up on the end of our time here. So Micah, we do have a couple questions that I think I'm going to email to you afterwards to get them answered, because we do still have some questions coming in and some that weren't answered at the beginning. So we do have one question that I think is actually valuable to what's on the screen right now. When do you want feedback by? Do you have a date for the feedback or anything like that?
So you're welcome to send in feedback anytime. We're over the next couple of months going to be crafting our engagement plan for 2021. So, and with that, identifying the key issues that need to be addressed and additional analysis that we need to undertake. So, I would say here we are about to enter October. Yeah, if you want to get in touch, it'd be great. Actually, it'd be ideal to hear before November 3rd. That would be ideal. If not, then shortly thereafter. Then it'd be most useful for us as we craft our work plan for the next year.
And where can they send that feedback to, Micah?
Yeah. Let me pull up my screen. My email address is there on the screen. If they want to send me an email, that would be great.
Perfect. So if you did ask a question at the presentation today, I will be in contact with you to ensure that Micah gets an answer for you. And like was stated at the beginning of the presentation, this presentation was recorded today, and a copy of the recording will be sent to everyone at the end of the day. Micah, is there anything else you would like to say?
I'd just like to say a big thank you to CIPH for hosting the session today, and thanks everyone for attending. Really appreciate your time and your great questions, and hoping to hear from some of you in follow-up if you've had a chance to digest the information a little bit more and review the slides. But yeah, looking forward to hearing from you, as well as looking forward to working with folks as we go forward to identify a set of actions and a regulatory framework that's going to work for everybody, and is going to have a good chance of success and implementation as well. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much to you, Micah, and thank you so much, Christine, for the presentation today. And if any other questions come up, please feel free to send them to info@ciph.com, and we can get those answered for you. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.